Welcome to today's presentation on Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH, hosted by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. We're thrilled to have you join us as we explore this crucial subject that aims to promote inclusive and fair housing opportunities across California. Today, we will provide an in-depth overview of fair housing and the significant efforts to affirmatively further fair housing. We will review historical context, current policies, and future plans, including feedback from previous public sessions. Additionally, we will outline our goals for the months ahead and invite your invaluable feedback to guide our ongoing initiatives. Our journey today begins with the understanding of the historical context and the evolution of fair housing laws. We will discuss the profound impact of past discriminatory policies and the transformative measures enacted to combat these injustices. This foundation is critical to appreciate the importance of AFFH and our collective duty to foster fair housing practices. Your participation is vital. We encourage you to engage actively, ask questions, and share your perspectives. Your insights will help shape our policies and actions to better serve Californians. Let's work together to create an inclusive and fair housing landscape where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you for being here, and let's begin our journey to understanding affirmatively furthering fair housing. Before we move to an overview of the history of fair housing, we first want to share a bit about our department and our role. Our mission is to promote safe, affordable homes and vibrant, inclusive, sustainable communities for all Californians. We aim to increase the supply as well as preserve affordable housing, ensure California plans for a range of housing needs, and hold jurisdictions accountable to their commitments under state law. We also aim to create solutions to the housing crisis through policy and research, and promote health and safety through mobile home regulations and building codes and standards. HCD is also the state agency that delivers key federal funding affordable housing programs for colonias, non-federally recognized Native American communities, and cities with populations under 50,000 people and counties with populations under 200,000 people, also known as non-entitlement jurisdictions. As shown in this graphic, HCD is the designated administrator for several federal programs, including but not limited to the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG program, which supports community development activities like infrastructure, economic development projects, public facilities installation, community centers, and even homeowner assistance. HCD also administers the Home Investment Partnerships, or HOME program, which provides formula grants to jurisdictions to fund activities including building, buying, and rehabilitating affordable housing or providing direct rental assistance to low-income people. As we will describe in detail later in this presentation, California's duty to affirmatively further fair housing is rooted in federal law. Before 1968, it was both common and legal to deny access to housing opportunities based on a person's race. In 1910, Baltimore, Maryland became the first jurisdiction to explicitly prohibit African Americans from buying homes on neighborhood blocks that were majority white. These restrictive racial covenants were placed in a property's official deed to prevent homes from being sold to non-white purchasers in the future. Support for segregation ordinances was widespread at that time, and jurisdictions nationwide continued to adopt such ordinances despite a 1917 Supreme Court decision that ruled they interfered with the right of a property owner to sell to whomever they choose. The Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, was created in 1934 by President Roosevelt. The agency issued bank mortgages and adopted home appraisal standards that limited loans to white owners. Furthermore, as documented by historian Richard Rothstein, the FHA issued guidance discouraging private banks from lending in neighborhoods that did not serve newly built suburban homes, and to give the properties a higher appraisal value to protect against, quote, the infiltration of inharmonious racial or nationality groups. To the left is an image of a so-called redlining map of San Francisco in 1937. This map, officially called a security map, was developed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency responsible for issuing low-interest government-backed loans to develop housing. The Homeowners Loan Corporation assessed risk for loan issuance based on a community's racial composition. Consequently, predominantly African American communities were listed at the lowest grade, grade 4, shown in red. Racial discrimination was also prevalent in other land use decisions. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 built 41,000 miles of interstate highways. Highways cut through neighborhoods and disrupted the pedestrian landscape of many urban communities, historically occupied by African American and other communities of color. According to the California Reparations Report, during the first 20 years of interstate highway constructions, more than 1 million people were displaced. Here's a case study of how government land use and housing policies harmed a 315-acre community in the Los Angeles area known today as the Chavez Ravine. Mexican American homeowners settled in the area largely because redlining practices prevented them from accessing housing opportunities in other parts of the city. Los Angeles city officials deemed the working class community as a blighted area to be cleared and redeveloped utilizing funds made available by the Federal Housing Act of 1949. In 1959, government officials seized land that was previously designated for public housing and forcibly displaced residents in the surrounding areas to use those federal funds to construct the Dodger Stadium. There is currently a legislative effort led by Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara and Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo to formally recognize the descendants of these communities through some form of reparations. Regrettably, low-income communities and communities of color were intentionally excluded from planning and development decisions. Throughout the early 20th century, communities of color advocated for equal treatment and equal protection under the law. Landmark victories for civil rights came in the mid-1960s. The Fair Housing Act was passed 4 years after the Civil Rights Act. It prohibits discrimination in how people access housing concerning the sale, rental, or financing of housing. However, by the time the Fair Housing Act was passed, patterns of segregation had been firmly established because of the government policies and practices that we discussed earlier. The Fair Housing Act established a new requirement for any state and local jurisdiction that sought federal funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It required that activities take place in a manner to affirmatively further fair housing purposes. Assembly Bill 686 of 2019 amended California law to define AFFH to mean taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. Specifically, affirmatively furthering fair housing means taking meaningful actions that, taken together, address significant disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. The duty to affirmatively further fair housing extends to all of a public agency's activities and programs related to housing and community development. Building on the Fair Employment and Housing Act and HUD's AFFH rule in 2015, AB 686 became law in 2018. It requires proactive steps beyond prohibiting discrimination, such as implementing policies that foster diverse and inclusive communities, identifying and removing obstacles to housing access for marginalized groups, and involving community members in planning and decision-making processes. HCD helps local jurisdictions to achieve these goals using our housing element process, which we will detail later in this presentation. The Fair Housing Act protects people from housing discrimination on the basis of personal protected characteristics, including race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. Additionally, the Fair Housing Act was amended in 1974 and 1988 due to advocacy of the women's rights and disability justice community to further protect people from housing discrimination on the basis of their sex, disability status, and familial status. California's FEHA, which was originally enacted in 1959 before the federal law and updated in 2020, protects people from housing discrimination for a broader set of personal characteristics, such as gender identity and expression, citizenship, and source of income, which includes public housing assistance and immigration status. Let's move on to fair housing planning. This planning identifies and addresses barriers to equal housing access. Actions include examining discriminatory practices, developing strategies, and implementing policy changes. Community engagement through public forums ensures this inclusivity. Its goals are to promote integration, reduce areas of concentrated poverty, increase access to opportunities, and meet the housing needs of marginalized populations. The Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice, commonly referred to as the AI, is conducted every 5 years as part of the Consolidated Plan, or the CON Plan. It identifies barriers to fair housing and involves extensive stakeholder and public engagement to gather input. This process helps jurisdictions develop strategies to promote equitable housing access. Community involvement through public hearings, surveys, and listening sessions ensures that all voices are heard and considered in the planning process. We at HCD work to provide stable, safe, affordable homes to veterans, seniors, young families, farm workers, tribes, people with disabilities, individual and families experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and all other Californians. HCD helps to foster inclusive communities of opportunity, including encouraging community and economic development by managing grant and loan programs to create new affordable rental and home ownership opportunities while enforcing regulations pertaining to manufactured or mobile homes and general building standards and codes. We also work with every community in California to ensure that proper plans are being made to meet the housing needs of everyone who is living or wants to live there. And, like we're doing today, we conduct research and analysis to put together plans and policies to support this work. As we mentioned earlier, HCD has a federal obligation to affirmatively further fair housing since we receive and distribute funds from HUD. However, we also have state law that requires us and other departments and agencies to ensure we're furthering fair housing in all of our activities. Assembly Bill 686 required local housing elements to analyze and assess fair housing, including how areas may have concentrations of wealth or racial groups. The law also spurred the creation of HCD initiatives to assess racial segregation, resource distribution, and displacement, such as the Opportunity Framework and the Neighborhood Change Mapping. HCD implements fair housing goals in a variety of ways. As we will describe soon, we plan to achieve fair housing goals through the AI process, which is why we're here today to hear from you. The primary agency responsible for enforcing the Federal Fair Housing Act is the California Civil Rights Department, formerly known as the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. For example, in 2020, HUD launched the Fair Housing Assistance Program to enforce fair housing laws. In 2022, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing resolved over 500 cases of housing discrimination, ensuring fair access to housing for all. California's AB 686 also empowers HCD to implement fair housing goals through the housing element process. Since 1969, California has required that all local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in the community through their housing elements. Housing elements must contain goals, policies, programs, and actions to address the housing issues identified in the housing needs assessment. While housing element law before AB 686 required that jurisdictions include programs and actions that would address shortcomings in relation to compliance with housing element law, the law now also requires that local jurisdictions include programs and actions to affirmatively further fair housing. Examples of types of potential strategies include increasing the number of place-based housing vouchers in high and highest opportunity areas, encouraging development of new affordable housing in areas of opportunity, and encouraging community revitalization through preservation of existing affordable housing and protecting existing residents from displacement. Finally, HCD is empowered to enforce other land use housing laws with an equity and/or fair housing component, including the Housing Accountability Act, No Net Loss Law, Density Bonus Law, and Anti-Discrimination in Land Use Law. Now let's discuss the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, or CAPER. This is an annual report that describes our progress toward the goals set out in our AI and consolidated plans. The COVID-19 pandemic created several historical challenges to California's economy. Though an array of challenges remain, actions taken by the state of California since 2020 have affirmatively furthered fair housing for protected classes and all residents of the state. I'd like to highlight some of the accomplishments in the last few years. HCD filed and won several fair housing related lawsuits throughout the state. Included was a suit the Housing Accountability Unit, or HAU, filed against La Cañada Flintridge, which resulted in the reversal of a previously denied housing project that would create 80 mixed-income residential dwelling units, 14 hotel units, and 7,791 square feet of office space. We were successful in a suit against the city of Anaheim, which reversed the denial of a conditional use permit so that the Grandma's House of Hope project could house 16 women in supportive housing. There was also a suit against the city of Elk Grove, in which Oak Rose Apartments would add 66 units of supportive housing plus a manager's unit for lower income households at risk of homelessness, but were improperly denied. Ultimately, in a settlement with the developer, the city agreed to relocate the project on city-owned land, which would be transferred directly to the developer, and the project would now be 81 one-bedroom units instead of the 67 studios previously mentioned. Additionally, the city will provide $5 million in grant funding to support the project and over $3 million for project and property costs related to the original site and damages. HCD also dispersed over $17 billion through grant and loan programs for housing projects, creating affordable housing preservation programs and funding policy changes at the local level through implementation of legislation such as Senate Bill 2. HCD enforced fair housing law, which included comprehensive housing element review processes, ensuring all local jurisdictions plan for their fair share of the state's housing needs for all income levels. This review also ensures jurisdictions include policies and actions that promote AFFH principles, including housing mobility, housing choice, and anti-displacement. As part of the housing element implementation, HCD's Housing Accountability Unit plays a key role in monitoring and enforcing the commitments to fair housing laws and duties that each jurisdiction is responsible for. HCD provides provided at least 338 letters of technical assistance to local jurisdictions through this unit. HCD also adopted department protocols around preference policies in response to Senate Bill 649, incorporating updated accessibility language into many of our NOFAs and standard agreements. Moving on, there remain many efforts that are in progress at HCD for addressing housing affordability. For instance, in response to the impediment of housing instability and homelessness, HCD continues to dedicate efforts and resources for creating a data tracking tool to track evictions statewide. In addressing the impediment of limited community awareness of fair housing protections and enforcement resources, HCD continues to pursue amplification of fair housing education and enforcement resources, namely through partner agencies like the Department of Civil Rights and their Education and Outreach Unit. This includes internal and external trainings and technical assistance. HCD continues efforts to address disparities in housing quality and infrastructure, particularly in lower income households and rural communities that rely on mobile homes for housing. Some of these efforts are tied in with HCD's mobile home park code enforcement efforts, including increasing the safety and habitability of mobile homes while preventing displacement. And finally, to address the impediment of insufficient accessible housing stock, HCD's efforts in progress include improved compliance with state and federal building codes that are related to the number of accessible units in HCD-funded activities. This is happening through monitoring and technical assistance, as well as increasing awareness of reasonable accommodation requirements through trainings with the state Civil Rights Department. Part of the AI planning and research involved an outreach and engagement campaign where over 1,500 people participated in 8 virtual sessions, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. We also had multiple convenings with housing advocates from across the state and fielded a community needs assessment survey for all residents of California. Throughout these engagements, we heard a lot of the barriers posed by the rising costs of rent, the rental application process, specifically credit checks and credit history, and the interconnection between accessibility, transportation, and housing needs. As mentioned in the last slide, we completed 6 listening sessions, including a focus on homelessness, disability and the aging population, persons who are immigrants, Indigenous, tribal, and Native peoples, tenant protections, and mobile home parks. Our webinars included the topics of urban housing and rural housing. All of these listening sessions and webinars we've completed have been recorded and posted on HCD's website. Our feedback sessions have been in person, with Sacramento being a hybrid of in-person and on Zoom. Southern California will be our final stop, with the date and time currently pending announcement. During our listening sessions, webinars, and soundboard meetings, common themes were raised by the public. The first we will highlight is the need for fair housing education. Specifically, there was a strong interest in more outreach and education regarding tenants' rights, as approximately 44% of the state's population rents their home, according to a 2022 census. Of this population of renters, 65.3% are people of color. In recognition of the need of more accessible information, HCD's Language Access Plan was published in 2022 and included the translation of all vital documents. We're also in the process of updating our Citizen Participation Plan, which will ensure HCD meets updated federal requirements. This document provides a process for encouraging citizens, inclusive of minorities, non-English speaking persons, and persons with disabilities, to participate in the development of our plans. We will be asking for your input during the public comment period for that document before the end of 2024. That said, stakeholders highlighted the continued need for additional fair housing education for protected classes and the need for increased accountability in the enforcement of existing fair housing laws. Suggestions were made for providing technical assistance and educational training on AFFH to all California state agencies that implement housing and community development programs, especially partner agencies. Stakeholders also raised the need for education for landlords and housing providers on fair housing issues and tenants' rights. Attendees of our listening sessions identified several tenant-related barriers to accessing housing, such as credit score and credit history requirements. A study by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in 2015 showed that approximately 20% of the adult population in America had no credit or an unusable credit score. Additionally, stakeholders mentioned a need to improve awareness of fair housing laws among housing providers and representatives. According to a survey by the Turner Center, only 52% of multifamily housing property owners were able to correctly report the source of income protections applying to their properties, which were codified in 2019 by the passing of Senate Bill 329. As mentioned on the previous slide, demographically, tenants are more likely to be members of protected classes than homeowners, which highlights the importance of tenants' rights as an issue for agencies that are committed to affirmatively furthering fair housing. Education and proactive enforcement are critical for ensuring that renter rights are realized. Stakeholders offered a few possible solutions, including additional regulation of rental housing, development of uniform tenant selection criteria, and expanded renter protections. Other suggestions included development of a grievance mechanism for tenants directly to HCD and implementation of tenants' rights guides in HCD-supported housing. Next, stakeholders highlighted a need for more affordable and accessible housing stock. There are proportionally more households with members who experience ambulatory or walking, hearing, vision, cognitive, or independent living limitations in households earning less than 80% of the area median income compared to those at income levels of 80% or above the area median income. For a non-blind, severely disabled adult relying entirely on Social Security income and state supplementary payments, the combined monthly benefit of $1,183 is less than the market value of a studio apartment in nearly half of the counties in California, which of course makes larger unit sizes even less affordable for those relying on these benefits. Since the 2020 AI, HCD has increased the minimum number of sensory accessible and mobility accessible units required within our Supernova and National Housing Trust Fund funding programs. But stakeholders in our previous listening sessions have still expressed concern over the availability of accessible housing units for lower income people with disabilities. Additionally, 20% of our Community Needs Assessment Survey respondents indicated that they could not obtain an accessible unit due to affordability. In California, there are more than 2.1 million households where the total household income is equal to or less than 30% of the area median income. This income category is referred to as extremely low income, or ELI. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, there is a shortage of nearly 1 million rental homes needed for ELI renters. HCD is committed to increasing the availability of safe and affordable housing for Californians, and in the past 4 years has awarded more than $17 billion in state and federal funds to advance this effort. While progress is continually being made, stakeholders have expressed continued concern over the amount of housing available to those earning extremely low income. As we mentioned earlier, the Department of Housing and Urban Development funds Fair Housing Assistance Program agencies. The California Civil Rights Department is the Fair Housing Assistance Program agency for our state, and in 2022, they received over 1,000 housing discrimination complaints. When they receive a complaint, they independently investigate and assess the legal facts and the legal issues within each case, and when appropriate, pursue legal mediation before filing a lawsuit to resolve disputes. In 2022, 1,004 housing discrimination complaints were reported in California, according to the Civil Rights Department. HCD's Housing Accountability Unit also supports fair housing enforcement by responding to stakeholder complaints about potential violations. The graphic on the right is a list of all the laws that the legislature has given us authority to enforce. The laws that pertain most to fair housing work include housing element law, land use discrimination law, and the AFFH law. We accept complaints about potential violations of housing laws and request for technical assistance through our online portals available on HCD's website. Based on stakeholder feedback so far, there's an interest in more proactive enforcement of fair housing laws. We're nearly ready to post the draft AI on our website, which will mark the beginning of the 30-day public comment period. You can provide comments during that time, and the most efficient way of doing that will be emailing them to us at aifairhousingreport@hcd.ca.gov, and we'll also provide other comment venues as well. We will review and incorporate feedback before releasing the final AI. Let's move into the feedback portion so you have a chance to share your thoughts. We ask that you let us know what resonates with you or what additional things you would like us to know regarding the key themes that we shared with you today. As we move into the final stages of draft development, are there other themes you would like us to consider? We'd like to thank you all for attending today, and if there are additional thoughts you'd like to share, please do so by emailing us at aifairhousingreport@hcd.ca.gov. Also, if you've not yet done so, please sign up for listserv on HCD's website so that you'll be notified of upcoming information, including announcements about the updated AI as they occur. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.